Hello, my name is Debbie Metke, and it is March 2016, and I have the extreme honor of interviewing 4 extraordinary Milwaukee area activists who are all over 100 years old and have spent their lives working for a better world.
This is Charlotte Bleistein. My birthday was January 4th, 1915.
Okay, Charlotte, how long have you been an activist?
I think I've been an activist all my life. My grandfather was a socialist and a progressive, and I just took it all on.
Wonderful. And were there any chief concerns you had about the world at the time?
Nothing except all the problems that were going on.
Okay, and it sounds like it was your grandfather who started you on your activism path.
I would think so.
Uh-huh.
Although my grandmother was pretty active too, because she was a friend of, I can't remember her name.
Oh, the La Follettes, Bill La Follette?
Bill, what's her full name?
Yeah, Bill La Follette,
Bill.
who was married to Bob La Follette, who was very
Bob
important
LaFollette.
in Wisconsin.
And she was the first woman educator.
Lawyer, was she?
Lawyer. She was the first one who graduated in law.
Uh-huh.
And my grandmother admired her so much that she wanted me to go into law. She talked me into it, and she talked my grandfather into paying for it.
Wow. And you were the first woman lawyer really in Wisconsin, weren't you?
One of the first.
Yes. Wow, and you still practiced up till a few years ago, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on the United Nations?
I think they're doing a wonderful job and hope they can continue.
Mm-hmm.
Hope the other countries cooperate with them.
Mm-hmm. What especially do you like about the United Nations?
I can't say that there's any specialty.
Uh-huh, okay.
It's everything they do.
And what
They're facing the whole world's problems, and the whole world has problems like we've never seen before.
That's true, right. What has kept you fighting all these years for a better world?
I can't answer that. I've just done it. That was my nature.
Okay, and do you have any words of advice for those who are coming after?
Well, join good organizations and be as active as you can.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No.
I'm Richard Franz.
And your birthday?
When's your birthday?
Oh, I was born July 10th, 1915.
Okay, and Dick, how long have you been an activist?
70 years.
Okay, and what started you on becoming interested in building a better world?
Joining the Quaker meeting between 1950 and 1960 in Milwaukee.
Okay, and what were your chief concerns with the world?
I had come back from being in the service of the Second World War, and I was stimulated originally by being a Lutheran and being taught not to kill anybody, and then finding myself training for 2 months to be something just the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And what are your thoughts on the United Nations?
I began with other persons in Waukesha to organize a chapter there, and then I met Quaker persons in Madison who had a chapter in Madison.
Mm-hmm. And why are you encouraged about the United Nations at the world level?
Because that's the one hope, no matter what all the negative history of attacks on the UN in this country by other persons, that it still is one of the only, it is the only hope for the world.
Okay, and what has kept you fighting for a better world all these
Working
years?
with other persons for the same object.
Okay. And what are your especially fond memories or successes about your years of activism?
Meeting all these people, some very prominent, and having the privilege of knowing them.
Wonderful. Okay. And do you have any words of advice or encouragement for those who are going to follow?
Yes, for all young people, keep working for the peace of the world through the UN.
Thank you, Richard.
Not too bad at that.
My name is Minnie Frew, and I was born in 1914.
Thank you, Minnie. And how long have you been an activist?
Well, a little bit activist when I was 16, so...
And what happened when you were 16?
Well, then I began questioning the vegetarianism.
Uh-huh. And was that was one of your chief interests then, vegetarianism?
It was.
And why is that?
Because I think we should be more kind to animals.
Mm-hmm.
And even on the farm, my father said that we weren't treating animals quite as gently as we could.
And you believe that affects human beings also? The way we treat animals?
Well, I believe so.
It makes us kinder?
I think that that's our job, to improve things.
Okay. And what other areas of activism were you interested in?
Well, treating people as well as we treat ourselves.
Wonderful. Okay. And was war one of anti-war? Was that a concern of yours, being through 2 world wars?
Well, the First World War was one that people talked a lot about after, and in the teens and the 20s. They were still recovering and still thinking about how high the price of butter was, and different things like that.
2 minutes.
And turn it off.
Uh-huh. And what are your thoughts on the United Nations, Minnie?
Well, I think that's the hope of the world right now.
Yeah.
Okay, and what kept you fighting for a better world all these years?
Well, maybe I didn't do it vigorously and as thoroughly as I should have, but I want us to treat animals as well as we treat ourselves, too, because they have feelings. And there's no reason why we can't be good to them.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any especially fond memories of your life of activism?
You mean doing things like putting out these little Halloween boxes?
Oh, UNICEF, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I was working with the PTA when we began that.
Okay. Right. And do you have any words of encouragement for those who will follow us?
Well, I think I have hope, a lot of hope for them, because if you don't start with a bad, treating animals badly, it'll be harder for you to do it, to start out doing it. And they're not going to see people being mean as much as they used to. So just that level will prevent people from committing cruel acts.
Very good. Thank you, Minnie. Thanks for talking with us today.
You're welcome.
My name is Joan Robertson, and I was born on January 27, 1916.
Thank you, Joan. And how long have you been an activist?
I think I was, well, let me say, my mother had me between marches down in Chicago with Jane Addams as a suffragette, not only to protest the war, it was 1916, the middle of the war, but to march for women's rights.
Wonderful. And what were your chief concerns about the world when you became an activist?
Well, that goes back to probably when I was in Europe. That's, of course, another story, but my chief concerns were that actually, I think at the point that you're speaking in my life, it was mainly local, and it was more on racial justice, equal pay for women, but open housing. You remember the open housing with Father Grappi?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was very important to me, and I learned volunteerism with the Junior League of Milwaukee when I joined when I was 23. And we took different stints. I went over to the Urban League and became quite familiar with the situation of the racial inequality.
Okay, great. And do you remember what started you on your activism path?
I believe it's genetic, and I think it probably started when I was born because, you know, as I say, I was born when Mother was marching, and I had to absorb something by osmosis, I'm sure.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on the United Nations?
I think the United Nations is our only salvation, to tell the truth, at least in our contemporary and near future life. And do you want me to tell you what I think the United Nations should do? They do many wonderful things now. They have many successes, but they also have failures that a lot of people harp on.
Mm-hmm. And what should we do to have a better United Nations?
Well, I think that we should all work very hard to educate the public through the UNA, USA, and other forums, educate them as to the importance and viability of a world peace through the United Nations, of world control of wars and all kinds of horrible things, the hunger and the poverty, everything. And then I think that we should investigate and study the efforts that are being made today by various organizations for reform. Reform the United Nations so that it does have more efficacy and power to make people understand that it can work.
Wonderful. And what keeps you fighting for a better world all of these years?
Well, I think the very fact that we all see how destructive and horrible and inhumane war is, and how it leads to more poverty, it leads to terrible privation in the areas that are stricken by war, and I don't think anybody can turn aside from these instant pictures that we get of what's happening in the world today, and has been happening for years, but now we really have it close up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you have any especially fond memories or successes in your life as an activist?
Well, I have many fond memories. I would say the International Rotary Clubs. We used to go to their conventions in Paris and Geneva and even in the United States and China, not China, Japan. various places where we would meet with people all over the world. And what was the question again?
That pretty much answers it. Do you have any especially fond memories or successes that come to your mind?
Oh yes, I think perhaps the fact that we have seen our United Nations take effect after. I was very active, as you were too, Debbie, in the World Federalist Movement. And I followed my mom into that, as well as being very supportive of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which gave us our start, my sister and myself, as far as being active in working for world peace. But then Mother was very interested in the World Federalists. She followed Norman Cousins. You remember, he was the originator of it in 1948, I believe it was, in North Carolina. And so that kept us busy for a long time. And then, of course, we began to follow Frank Seidler, our great mentor and leader, and Richard Leonard, and the current people who are members of the United Nations of Milwaukee. And then my fond memory is re-establishing the United Nations Association chapter of Palm Beach, because that was a big influence in Robbie's and my life when we would winter down there.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any words of advice or encouragement to those who will follow us?
Oh yes, I think that I think it's everybody's duty. I really think it's a duty of every person in the world, but mainly in the United States, because we're so fortunate that we have had, except for this terrible Civil War and some of the other wars that the imperialists among us have started. But the Second World War, of course, impressed all of us terrifically, not only with the devastation, the horror, and the deaths, but and then, of course, along came Vietnam and Korea and all the rest of it. Just inexcusable in Iraq, inexcusable. So those things are not to be forgiven or forgotten, but they are to be remembered in history. I think history is the most important thing that we can get across to people. Study the errors of the past and learn from them, and go on and hope. There's nothing like hope for the future.
And that's a good segue. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about our future?
Oh, I'm very optimistic. I think that there's absolutely no reason for anybody to just say, with cynicism say, oh, it's always been this way, it's always going to be this way, there always will be wars, there always will be corruption. It's ridiculous to see that the progress that mankind has made over these centuries has been remarkable. And I think that we can, especially with the remarkable technology of today, we can make advances that people couldn't dream of in the way of civil society and civility toward each other and decency in the world and cooperation among nations. There's no question in my mind. It's going to come, and it may not be, it certainly won't be in my lifetime, but it'll be in your lifetimes or beyond you and the generations to follow if they work at it. They got to work at it.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome.